Hello and welcome back. My previous demo for either my independent study students or my water-based media students, depending on who's actually watching, uh, or if it's anybody else, more than welcome to watch, focused on the use of two colors in watercolor. And how two colors, a warm and a cool, which is something that I did not explain in my previous video, but I will explain this time why I chose them. A warm and a cool could serve to create nice contrast in terms of colors and design. I wanted to also, before going into my next subject, showcase some other ways that you can use two color pieces, featuring a couple of pieces I've done before. For example, this piece right here, this is a small watercolor piece that I did, I think it's about 1 or 2 years ago. I do life drawing sessions on Tuesday evenings, and one of the sessions I just decided to do it completely in watercolor, and it was pretty fun and pretty cool. And yeah, this is one of the pieces that I did. I only used two colors, similar to my bird piece. I used a warm and a cool, and the reason I did that, although I implied it in the last piece because I did talk about contrast, the idea being that with your warms and cools, you can actually have a nice sense of lights and shadows and tonalities that can imply different textures and different cohesion within your piece. By using warms and cools, you can actually imply the effects of light in a room in terms of like the type of light that you're receiving, as well as the direction of light and the opacity or like darkness of the shadows that surround the piece. It's like a bit of a mad scientist piece, so the colors, the reds and the blues, actually turned out to work pretty well for it. Another piece that I basically started, I haven't really finished up on, is this creepy Batman vampire piece that I did right here. It's a little large, so I might just adjust my camera ever so slightly so you can get a better sense of it. There we go. And it's right here. You can see the bottom of it here. Let's see if we can see the full thing. It's quite big. Anyway, with this one, I also used blues and just one tint of blue and one tint of red, and just kind of combined them throughout to create my shadows and lights, my textures, the tones here underneath the nose. All those pieces I used specifically two colors, and this is to accentuate just how much you can get out of watercolors by basically using only two colors in your pieces. But now that we've established that, and here's my bird again, I wanted to move on into maybe adding different elements to this piece. Perhaps a couple of different colors and different tonalities, and kind of go from there. So I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to this piece and include a third color. And you'll see what happens once that enters into fray. And again, I want to showcase that I'm not taking that much paint. My previous paints are still here. They're still pretty much set for extra work. And by just adding a third color, we're going to see what kinds of different textures and forms we can create on our piece. So let's get started with that one. So I still have my brush. There's my brush. I'm going to add some water, clean that up. I'm still using my reference bird, designed and sculpted by my aunt, Malena Viles, who was awesome. As you can see, there's a little bit of warms down in this area. So I'm just going to add a little bit here and there, kind of accentuate that spot right here. But again, what happens is, when you add watercolors to these areas, what starts happening? You can actually blend them in the stuff that was there before. And one of the cool things about this is that because it's watercolor, and watercolor reacts to, well, water, it reactivates the pigment. So, ooh, you start seeing the color kind of come back to life there a little bit. And you can add just a little bit of that in here as well. Now, remember to be careful with the amount of color that you're adding, the areas that you're adding, because if you're used to painting, you probably know that once you add a certain amount of color into one spot, what you're gonna get is this sense of brown that really doesn't work with your piece, right? So suddenly you're gonna need a little bit of what I call surgery to fix some stuff. We haven't done that here yet, so that's at least a good thing to do. So, but if you add some warms here, and then you can start extending them just ever so slightly to the side. You don't want the crest to be too bright, because you're trying to create the illusion of light and shadow. And then you can add some more water in and blend this whole thing in as well. And from one tonality of yellow, not blending it on my tray, still keeping it individualized right here, suddenly I have tonalities of reds, of yellows, of oranges, of darker oranges, almost purples. We have all sorts of colors that suddenly arise from just the use of three basic colors. Our primary colors, if you will. I mean, they are primary colors. But just by using that, you can just add so much texturing and so much work. And then you can always go back and fix things or add stuff. Add more reds, different areas. Just to pop it out just ever so slightly. There, by adding some other yellows and other spots that you may not have thought of putting in the first place, like for example on the beak, to give it a sense of lights and shadows. Same deal with just a little bit of yellow right up here to kind of blend it into a little bit of a thing. Maybe add some water to spread that out ever so much. Now suddenly you have a nice little tint of green up there too, which can serve to imply like a tonality of lighting. And if it's too much, you can wait till it's dry and just put more blue in there. So it can always transform. It's funny because I kind of started going more Toucan Sam than this guy, but I really just wanted to take the paint out for a spin. So I'm really more looking at how to make colors work rather than go specific. But you know, the blends can work a lot to create those lights and shadows that you normally wouldn't see. You can kind of see a little bit of that work as presented throughout. At the same time, you don't want to overdo it. You want to kind of stay in a more format. You can definitely do that. Just kind of keep it in a lighter format, as it were. And remember, you can always wait until it dries, because watercolor tends to dry relatively quickly, especially if you're using watercolor paper. It is a good, cool blending area. And if you see something like this, where it maybe like a little bit of color came onto the side, you can always just go back in and Add some water and blend that right in. That's what I love about watercolor. It's vibrant. It's, especially if you're using washes, it's vibrant and it's malleable. You can keep using it over and over and over, and it's still going to be exciting. I mean, there'll come a time where the pigment will be pretty dry, but it's not for a while. I can come back to this piece tomorrow, wet my brush, and just start messing with it, moving paint around, and it will work just based on this particular. And if this were to dry on me, I can still add water to these pieces and they'll still activate. Will it be as potent as a straight up piece of watercolor from the tube? Probably not, but it's still very active, and you can actually do more things with it. To show you a couple more examples of watercolor work. Don't think me super morbid. I just happen to have a skeleton in my office that I use for a lot of my examples, and I use it as a source of lights and shadows for both acrylic, color, and illustration studies. And this is another piece where I used just my primary colors to create my lights and shadows and the form of my skeleton. So generally speaking, this is how I actually developed this piece. If you want to see something that has a little bit more of a combination to it, ages ago, well now, not ages, literally like 3 years ago, I don't know why I said ages, I drew this other Batman, man, that's apparently that pattern with me, with inks. I basically used a brush pen, if I remember correctly. I used specifically a brush pen, not an actual ink brush. And years later, when I was teaching water-based media for the second time, I want to say, I decided to practice on him, adding colors and lights in different spots. As you can see, I combine warms and cools in the cowl itself to give it contrast, lights and shadows, and also a sense of like reflected lighting with regards to like the tone, as well as incorporating a mesh of like shadows and blues with warms, kind of like orange warms for the skin tone to create the figure. But I kept the line work underneath, so it was a nice combination of both line composition and watercolors, and they blended relatively well. I'm not going to say that all pens work this way, but a lot of pens you can do tests with them and they will not run as much with regards to watercolor work. There's waterproof pens that definitely work well with watercolors. And in a future demo, I can definitely add some inks to this piece if indeed it is necessary. I'm going to add some blues up here. Just to give it more of a rounded form. And over here as well, kind of like surround it just a little bit. But as you can see, you don't need to add a ton of color to create that sense of light and shadow. Once you cement your shadow points using contrasting colors, meaning if your shadows are going to be blues, use your reds as overlay to create that tonality of shadow and light, and then you can actually bring in your reds in here to create the breast of the bird. And then you can use your yellows to create that light, or that light point. But once you create that form and you use your brush to create the feel of the feathers, moving in the contour of the actual piece, you'll have a nice sense of control that you can actually play with. Try it out, definitely. If you're looking to make some pieces with watercolors, it's definitely fun. I'll be back at a different point with some acrylic demos, and I am also working on the idea of doing some marker demos as well. I do a lot of marker work in my freelancing gigs. So that might be something to include here as well. Anyway, thank you very much. See you next time. Bye.